pressure is mounting on Oxford University to honour its commitment by applying a no-profit and no-royalty principle in the production and distribution of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, the university entered into an exclusive agreement with the company that develops the vaccine to put profits aside in the distribution of the doses. The Newzroom Afrika Society, composed of Oxford University alumni, students and other parties, have signed a letter demanding that the agreement between the university and AstraZeneca be made public. And this comes amid growing concerns around the world, in fact, about vaccine exclusivity and high costs. Let's unpack the story for you now. We're joined by Oxford University alumni Shahira Kala. She joins us via our video link in Pretoria, and PhD student Simphiwe Stewart, who joins us from Oxford in England this morning. To both of our guests, welcome to the AM Report. It's great to have you with us. And I think I want to begin with you, Simphiwe, because despite the need for such a pledge, a non-profit and a for no-profit vaccine pledge, in terms of Oxford having already received over, I think it's £65.5 million in public funding, I mean, this should make it should go without saying.
Yes, Michelle, absolutely. And I think we, as the Oxford Afrika Society and the various signatories to the open letter that I'm sure you've seen, agree. The university, through various platforms, essentially received this 65.5 million in funding to develop the vaccine. And, this public funding was allocated under the premise, certainly according to the university and according to reports from the university, under the premise that it would be for the development of a people's vaccine. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that since that agreement, that licensing agreement was signed with AstraZeneca, there's been increasing secrecy around how this process is managed, around the agreements that have been made with various logistical partners, including suppliers and manufacturers in different countries, and just an overall lack of transparency around the process surrounding how the vaccine is going to be allocated.
And Shahira, I mean, Simphiwe talks about an increase in secrecy around the terms of that agreement. What do we know about Oxford's agreement with AstraZeneca, just in terms of licensing and pricing?
Quite frankly, we don't know anything. And this is precisely why we wrote this letter, because we felt that we deserved transparency, particularly in the context of Oxford making this no-profit, non-exclusive pledge when the vaccine was actually created.
Yeah.
And so even understanding the fact that we're now seeing the innovation and research system is very much broken, and pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca can go into exclusive licensing and have no real accountability to the stakeholders involved in these processes. I mean, we're thinking about the AstraZeneca vaccine in particular. I mean, there were trials in South Africa and across the world where people put their lives at risk to ensure that a safe vaccine was created. And now we're being told that we don't deserve to know what the terms of the agreement are. And it's just really upsetting, disappointing. And the university's response to our letter has been equally dismal.
Yeah. And what has that response been so far?
Well, in a nutshell, the university has said that they went into the agreement with AstraZeneca to increase equity and production. They needed funds to do this. They don't speak about the fact that, the no-profit and non-exclusive pledge, also created avenues for other things, other ways to actually increase vaccine production. The WHO had a portal for the know-how for vaccines to be shared, and the university has said nothing about why they're not sharing it with that portal if they're so concerned about equity. The other issue that comes to mind is that the university has created vaccines and other technology through the ChAdOx platform, and it's not clear that the ChAdOx platform actually has a commitment to no profit and a commitment to equity. There's also the failure to be transparent. So we had asked them to share the terms of the agreement, and they're saying they can't share that. We had raised the issue of price apartheid. I mean, the fact that AstraZeneca was charging South Africa almost double the EU for the same vaccine. And they had just said to us, this is an issue you need to take up with AstraZeneca. So they're taking no accountability for their very prominent role in this process and their complicity, I dare say.
And Simpiwe, the issues that Shahira is outlining now in terms of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, in terms of this vaccine apartheid that we're now seeing here in South Africa and around the world, it's not an issue that is exclusive to the AstraZeneca vaccine either.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think Shaira, and thank you, Michelle, for that question, brings up the really important point here, which is the development of this AstraZeneca vaccine is not going to be the last opportunity for the university to use, these brilliant minds at the Jenner Institute and platforms like ChAdOx to really change, fundamentally change the way that countries, the public health system is able to respond to pandemics like COVID. So as Shara mentioned, the university does have this ChAdOx platform, which is a type of viral vector used by Vaccitech, which is the company that's a part of the Jenner Institute and developing the vaccine. So this ChAdOx platform has, thousands of participants participating in various pharmaceutical trials where a particular vector is used as a prophylactic vaccine, not only for pandemics like COVID-19, but perhaps more alarmingly more importantly, for therapeutic regimes for diseases like prostate cancer, like hepatitis B, malaria, TB, influenza, and various other illnesses. So if we're seeing this type of limited transparency, vaccine apartheid, and dare I say vaccine nationalism that the university has become complicit in, we're not just talking about COVID-19, which is, inarguably the most devastating public health crisis we've had in our lifetime, but we're talking about other very serious illnesses where the innovation, the technical capacity, and really the skills of these, academics and other partners at the Jenner Institute could be used.
Yeah. Shahira, it's a bizarre situation we find ourselves in, not least because none of us are safe until there is vaccine equality around the world. Talk to us about the TRIPS waiver, that temporary waiver of certain intellectual property obligations, and how richer nations have actually blocked it from coming into being so that there is more vaccine equality around the world. I understand that there are particular nations that are blocking the TRIPS waiver because they say they still need proof that it will actually resolve the vaccine backlogs we're seeing here in South Africa and around the world.
Yeah, it was really disappointing to see that the second round of talks at the WTO were actually not successful. And again, we're seeing the power of Big Pharma to lobby governments to stop this waiver from being implemented, and seeing global access to this vaccine as a threat, which is absolutely bizarre, as you've said. But a little bit of context as well for the TRIPS. I've been reading Mark Fairwood's biography, Get Up, Stand Up. As a young activist, I think it's recommended highly. And I've also been following Fatima Hassan and other Umunyana Rugege from Section 27 and the long battle to fix the patent laws in South Africa. Yep. And what's interesting about TRIPS is that it was in the context of discussions around access to AIDS medication that the agreement was passed the agreement itself had direct lobbying from big pharmaceutical companies. So for us to say that the TRIPS agreement must be waived temporarily for this time of crisis is not just like Simpiwe says, a question of this moment, but a question of future moments. We know this is not the last pandemic that we will have. We also know that illnesses like TB kill more people in South Africa. So what we need to understand here is that it's not just a question of now, it's a question of showing that the system itself and how we create medication, how we roll it out, is really broken and needs rethinking. Yeah. We also know that people across the world have stood up against what's happening. We've seen that there's been a declaration to have the vaccine declared a common good. There's also been the People's Vaccine campaign that we have supported. And that has been, really civil societies across the world. Yesterday, I joined a meeting with the Universities for Allied Access to Medications, the UAEM, Universities Allied for Essential Medications. And they are trying to get universities across the world, particularly those in the global north who stand to profit from this vaccine, to pledge to give the research for public good. And this is, the figure of Jonas Salk, who is the inventor of the polio vaccine, comes to mind. When he was asked why he didn't patent his vaccine, or not his vaccine, but the vaccine for polio, he said that, the people own the vaccine. There is no patent. Could you patent the sun? Sure. And I think that same mentality needs to guide where this conversation around the TRIPS waiver goes. It's not a question of whether or not the TRIPS waiver needs to be supported, and it is supported by more than 100 countries, and the World Trade Organization is made up of something like 160, so the vast majority support it. But it is the nations that stand to profit. It is the vaccine nationalism that is stopping this from going forward. And that is something that is that needs to be widely criticized, and we need to take action against the countries. There's also a lot of lobbying happening in the U.S. to get the Biden administration behind this issue. But we know that there's also a lot of influence from pharmaceutical companies there who actually support politicians quite directly.
I mean, it's interesting to see because before we had a vaccine, pledges were being made left, right, and center to ensure that there would be no such thing as vaccine apartheid. Of course, we saw that change once the vaccine came onto the scene. Simpiwe, your final comments on what happens now, because despite these 100 signatories to that letter demanding that Oxford honor that non-profit vaccine pledge, essentially what you're asking them to do is the right thing.
Absolutely, Michelle. And I think just two things that those who are watching the program can take away today. The first is that this request under TRIPS, so this trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights waiver, it's not unconventional. It's not a radical or new ask. Certainly, according to the university, the university's response to our letter was that AstraZeneca is working with more than 20 different supply partners across more than 15 countries to leverage local manufacturing and to leverage these knowledge sharing systems. This is infrastructure that already exists, right? So if the university is saying that they're already leveraging knowledge sharing and already leveraging local manufacturing, we're saying because of the way that this vaccine has been developed, which is quite traditional in the spectrum of vaccines, there is an infrastructure that allows for local manufacturers, when there is a TRIPS waiver, to use their capacity to develop and to radically increase the amount of vaccine that is in supply. And secondly, with this vaccine nationalism, really we have to think about how this bid where, some 14% of the world's population has some 50% of the supply of vaccines that are in circulation isn't just detrimental to the national interests of those countries. It's obviously detrimental to the least developed countries. And of course, we mean the global south, parts of Latin America. And you see this sort of dissonance playing itself out even in the UK, where the UK has a ban list currently, a red list of some 35 countries that are not allowed to enter the UK because of the high rates of coronavirus in those places. 32 of those countries, including South Africa, Eswatini, where I'm from, Brazil, Colombia, those places are predominantly in the global south. And if we don't take this vaccine to where it's needed, which is those areas, not only is it impacting real living people, it's also impacting the national interest of countries like the UK. And I know you asked earlier which countries had opposed the TRIPS waiver. And those countries are those that stand to benefit from this pharmaceutical monopoly that's being developed. So Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States. And I think what we're asking the university is just to raise their voice, leverage their voice and their positionality in this conversation to say, this is not the moment to prioritize profits over people. It's the moment for a people's vaccine, because we are in an unprecedented crisis and we need a solution.
Absolutely. To both of our guests, such an important story. Thank you so much for your time this morning on the AM Report. Oxford University alumni Shera Kala joining us via our video link in Pretoria, and PhD student Simpiwe Stewart, joins us from Oxford in England this morning. A shocking statistic coming from that discussion: 14% of the world's population has 50% of vaccine supply, and that 14% is, of course, the richer countries around the world.